Aloha guys, Dr. Tom Walker back. We're going to continue our, you know what it is, fascinating discussion with nerve tissue or nervous tissue. Okay, we touched on this a little bit by the end of the previous video. We said there are two kinds of nerve cells, neurons, which are the functioning nerve cells, the ones that actually create and transmit nerve signals. And there are a number of supporting cells called neuroglia or glial cells that are very important too. Okay, typical neuron has three parts. The cell body, dendrites, which bring in sensory information from the environment or from other neurons, and the axon, which transmits energy away from, nerve signal, away from the cell body. And like these axon terminals here can attach with other nerves and what have you, muscles. Bundles of axons are what we know as, quote, nerves. Some of the axons are a foot or two long. Is that all we're going to talk about for nerves? I guess so. Okay. Muscle tissue, composed of cells or fibers that contract to cause movement of a body part. Three kinds of muscle in the body. Skeletal muscle, the one we're most familiar with. Smooth muscle, which lines organs, lines our larger blood vessels and our respiratory parts of our respiratory tract or gastrointestinal tract and so forth. And then cardiac muscle. The heart is a muscle all of its own. It's unique. Cardiac muscle tissue is only found in the heart. So what are the three kinds of muscle? Skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. Of those, only one is voluntary, which of course is skeletal muscle. We can move it on command. Smooth muscle and cardiac muscle are categorized as involuntary muscle fibers. Locations, here we go. Skeletal muscles have these little stripes on them, guys, which are called striations. Cardiac muscle does as well. So it would be correct to say that both skeletal and cardiac muscle are striated muscle. Smooth muscle does not have striations. Again, of the three, only skeletal muscle is voluntary, can be voluntarily contracted. In this case, they've taken it out of near the biceps area. Of course, cardiac muscle, again, is only found in the heart. Smooth muscle is found all throughout the body in a lot of places, but one place is it lines the intestines, and that's where they've shown this. This is the small intestine here. Tissue repair. Okay. Now, the reason we're covering this quickly, guys, is we're going to go over this all in more detail when we start talking about the muscular system and the glandular system and so forth. So this is just a brief introduction on the tissues of these systems, and we'll go into a lot more detail when we start talking about that. Tissue repair. Regeneration is replacement of tissue via mitosis. Remember what mitosis is. Cell division is how cells reproduce. They split, boing, and you have two identical daughter cells. Fibrosis, replacement of injured tissue with fibrous connective tissue, which is commonly known as scar tissue. Keloid scarring is excessive scarring that tends to occur in people with darker skin. And it's just like bigger, thicker scars. Sometimes, if they're in an area like face or neck where they're highly visible, sometimes it's recommended they get plastic surgery. A plastic surgeon can go in there and remove that without making it proliferate, get worse. So how do tissues repair? Well, they replace new tissue with new tissue coming from dividing. They can fill it with fibrosis with scar tissue. Sometimes we get keloid scarring. Steps in tissue repair. Let's see. Okay, so we got a split here. This is a hunk of skin. So we have a wound. First thing that happens is it starts clotting over because it's been bleeding. Notice, guys, the blood vessels don't go all the way up into the epidermis. We actually haven't talked much about, but this is the epidermis. This is the dermis. And this is the subcutaneous layer. The blood vessels come up, and nutrients and so forth diffuse up into the epidermis, but the most outer layers of the skin are dead already anyway. But in this case, it went deeply enough that it caused bleeding. So we have clotting. A scab starts to form. And then C, tissue, scar tissue starts forming. The epithelial cells multiply. Scab detaches and heals up. Sometimes it'll have a scar. It depends on how deep and extensive the wound was. The process of healing, guys, amazes me. In one of the earlier videos, I made a comment that I have ultimate great respect for biological systems, and I kind of laughingly said, because they can heal. And I said, can your computer heal? But there's some truth to that. The stuff that just a simple process like this, guys, is far beyond what any sort of technology and all can do. I mean, we can emulate some of the stuff, but Okay, so that's tissues. Now we're going to talk about membranes. There are a lot of membranes in the body. They function with a lot of important responsibilities. Let's see. Membranes, thin sheets of tissue that cover surfaces. Line body cavities, like the pleural cavities, thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity. Surround organs. The lungs, for example, have a membrane that wraps around them called visceral pleura. And then the cavity has a similar type of lining that's also called pleura. Classifications of membranes. Many of them are epithelial in nature. Cutaneous means skin, mucus. Mucous membranes, guys, produce mucus. Mucus may seem gross, but it's important because it traps things. Junk, cellular debris, bacteria, viruses, particulate matter. Any membrane or any orifice that connects to the outside world is lined with mucous membrane. And then there are a great number of serous membranes in the body. The ones we talked about the lung a moment ago. The visceral and parietal, there's the term I was trying to grab. Pleura are made of serous membranes. Connective membranes. Synovial membranes surround freely moving joints, like our elbows and knees. Periosteum. Periosteum is a very important membrane that wraps around bone. Very important. Perichondrium. Wraps around cartilage. Meninges. You probably heard of meningitis. It's an infection of the meninges. The meninges are the three membranes that surround the brain and the spinal cord. Very important. And then fascia. Muscles, guys, are very extensive. They're very complicated. They're actual organs in the body. I treated injuries in muscles for many, many years and gained a lot of respect for them. They generate a lot of heat. They scarf down a lot of oxygen and they're very vascular, have a lot of blood flow. They also have an extensive membrane system that wraps around them. Not only does it wrap around the outside of them, but it goes down in between the fibers of muscle and wraps around those into little bundles. And that is called fascia or myofascia. Now, all of this is important. Mucous and serous membranes, synovial membranes, periosteum is very important. Perichondrium around cartilage, meninges, fascia. Epithelial membranes, again, mucous membranes. Now, since this is the nasal cavity and the throat, remember what I said a moment ago, cavities that connect with the outside world have mucous membranes. The heart has a membrane around it called the pericardium. There's a visceral pericardium. Then, let's take the lungs. I think they're an easier example to understand. The membrane that wraps around the organ itself, and in the case of the lungs, it's called pleura. You may have heard of pleurisy. If it's the part that wraps around the organ, it's called visceral pleura. If it's the part that lines the cavity, it's called parietal pleura. So the lungs, the cavity that the lungs are in, is lined with this special membrane, pleura, but the organs themselves are wrapped in it as well. And they're very smooth where they can glide across each other. Cutaneous membrane, they've just shown the skin. Now, in the abdominal cavity, we have something similar. It's called the visceral peritoneum and the parietal peritoneum. The abdominal cavity is lined with visceral peritoneum. The organs are wrapped around with parietal. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. As you were, visceral lines around the organs. Visceral means organs. I'm sorry. Parietal lines the cavity. An infection, guys, of the peritoneum is very serious. It can still be fatal to this day. Like a ruptured appendix, when the people get really deathly sick, it's because they've developed peritonitis, it's called. Mucous membranes line all body cavities open to the exterior of the body. Respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive. Serous membranes line ventral body cavities that do not open to the exterior. Ventral. The pleura, parietal and visceral. Pericardium, the heart has a sac around it. That's what it's called. Peri means around. Peritoneum is in the abdominal cavity, parietal and visceral peritoneum. Pleura's lungs, peritoneum is the abdominal cavity. I sped up on purpose, and I sped up too fast. Let's see what's important to go over. All of this, of course, guys, is important. It's all very basic, but that's okay. When we study the nervous system and we study the musculoskeletal systems, we'll go into this in more detail. You'll see a lot more about nerves and how they function. We'll explain more about some of the structure here. But in the meantime, know what neurons and neuroglia are. Know the different types of connective tissue. There are 4. Epithelium, remember? Connective, nervous, and bone, the different types of connective tissue. Loose, dense fibers, cartilage, bone, blood, and lymph. Yes, blood and lymph, even though they're liquid, they are still connective tissue. We talked about tendons, ligaments, and cartilage, and why that their injuries to these areas are slow to heal. Why? Because it's not well vascularized. It doesn't have a lot of blood flow. Ligamentous injuries, guys, like a lot of athletes have ACL tears in their knee. That's called the anterior cruciate ligament. Ligaments just, if they rupture or rip or something, guys, they're just really slow to heal up. And oftentimes they have to have surgery or just never be the same again. Cartilage, especially, of the 3, cartilage is the one that would heal the least. It's almost like a chunk of styrofoam or something. That's not a good comparison, but it sort of is. We talked about connective tissue, glandular. It's important to know exocrine and endocrine glands, although you'll soon get to that in what's called the endocrine system. Endocrine glands are ductless glands. They secrete their products, their hormones, directly into the bloodstream, where it circulates to specific target areas, target cells. Exocrine, like milk glands in the female breast, sweat glands, have ducts. Or the pancreas is the only gland that's both. And it produces a lot of our digestive enzymes, and there's a duct that carries it directly into the small intestine where it's needed. We talked about epithelium. It can be stratified or it can be simple. Simple means it's one layer. Stratified means it's lots of layers. 3 shapes. Squamous looks like floor tiles. Cuboidal looks like a cube. Columnar looks like a column. The best example of epithelium is our skin, which is simple, stratified squamous. Not simple, I'm sorry. Stratified squamous. Or some people will say squamous. Just like some people say umbilicus. Or pass the potatoes. You know, that kind of thing. I know, you're thinking, Dr. Tom, what gives you the right to criticize these people? I'm not making fun of them because they deserve it, that's why. If they want to make fun of me, since I have such a sterling reputation, everybody in the world knows who I am. I'm sure I'm highly criticized, but in fact, since no one knows who I am, it doesn't matter. We're about to run out of time. All right. Well, read over this yourself and take notes and memorize it all. A lot of memory work, a lot of learning, guys, in healthcare like this. When it comes to medical terminology and anatomy and these topics, there tends to be, it seems like that there's a hesitancy to use the term memorize, but a lot of learning is memorizing, a great deal of it. Okay, we're running out of time. Join me next time. We'll continue onward. This is Dr. Tom signing.